Our names were sent up, and a well-dressed elderly housekeeper, a most distinct articulator, showed us the house, which I need not describe as there is an account of it published in Adams' Works in Architecture. Dr. Johnson thought better of it today than when he saw it before, for he had lately attacked it violently, saying, "It would do excellently for a town hall. The large room with the pillars," said he, "would do for the judges to sit at the assizes, the circular room for a jury chamber." Oops. Sorry about that. "And the rooms above for prisoners." Still, he thought the large room ill-lighted, and of no use but for dancing in, and the bedchambers but indifferent rooms, and that the immense sum which it cost was injudiciously laid out. Dr. Taylor had put him in mind of his appearing pleased with the house. "But," said Johnson, "that was when Lord Scarsdale was present. Politeness obliges us to appear pleased with a man's work when he is present. No man will be so ill-bred as to question you. You may therefore pay compliments without saying what is not true. I should say to Lord Scarsdale of his large room, 'My lord, this is the most costly room that I ever saw,' which is true." Dr. Mannington, physician in London, who was visiting at Lord Scarsdale's, accompanied us through many of the rooms, and soon afterwards my lord himself, to whom Dr. Johnson was known, appeared and did the honors of the house. We talked of Mr. Langton. Johnson, with a warm vehemence of affectionate regard, exclaimed, "The earth does not bear a worthier man than Bennet Langton." We saw a good many fine pictures, which I think are described in one of Young's tours. There is a printed catalogue of them which the housekeeper put into my hand. I should like to view them at leisure. It was much struck with Daniel interpreting Nebuchadnezzar's dreams by Rembrandt. We were shown a pretty large library. In his lordship's dressing room lay Johnson's small dictionary. He showed it to me with some eagerness, saying, "Look ye, que terra nostrae non pleo laboris." Is there any land of all this land that is not yet rife with our tales of sorrow? He observed also Goldsmith's animated nature, and said, "Here's our friend. The poor doctor would have been happy to hear of this." In our way, Johnson strongly expressed his love of driving fast in a post-chaise. "If," said he, "I had no duties and no reference to futurity, I would spend my life in driving briskly in a post-chaise with a pretty woman, but she should be one who could understand me and who would add something to the conversation." I observed that we were this day to stop just where the Highland army did in 1745. Johnson said, "It was a noble attempt." I said, "I wish we could have had an authentic history of it." Johnson said, "If you were not an idle dog, you might write it by collecting from everybody what they can tell and putting down your authorities." I said, "But I could not have the advantage of it in my lifetime." And Johnson answered, "You might have the satisfaction of the fame by printing it in Holland. And as to profit, consider how long it was before writing came to be considered in a pecuniary view. Bretty says he is the first man that ever received copy money in Italy." I said that I would endeavor to do what Dr. Johnson suggested, and I thought that I might write so as to venture to publish my History of the Civil War in Great Britain in 1745 and 1746 without being obliged to go to a foreign press. Footnote here. I am now happy to understand that Mr. John Home, who was himself gallantly in the field of the reigning family in that interesting warfare, but is generous enough to do justice to the other side, is preparing an account of it for the press. When we arrived at Derby, Dr. Butter accompanied us to see the manufactory of china there. I admired the ingenuity of and delicate art with which a man fashioned clay into a cup, a saucer, or a teapot, while a boy turned around a wheel to give the mass rotundity. I thought this an excellent in its species of power as making good verse in its species. Yet I had no respect for this potter, neither indeed as a man of any extent of thinking for a mere verse maker in whose numbers, however perfect, there is no poetry, no mind. The china was beautiful, but Dr. Johnson justly observed it was too dear, for that he could have vessels of silver of the same size as cheap as what were here made of porcelain. I felt a pleasure in walking about Derby, such as I always have in walking about any town to which I am not accustomed. There is an immediate sensation of novelty, and one speculates on the way in which life is passed in it, which, although there is a sameness everywhere upon the whole, is yet minutely diversified. The minute diversities in everything are wonderful. Talking of shaving the other night at Dr. Taylor's, Dr. Johnson said, "Sir, of 1,000 shavers, 2 do not shave so much alike as not to be distinguished." I thought this not possible till he specified so many of the various varieties of shaving, holding the razor more or less perpendicular, drawing long or short strokes, beginning at the upper part of the face or the under, at the right side or the left side. Indeed, when one considers what variety of sounds can be uttered by the windpipe in the compass of a very small aperture, we may be convinced how many degrees of difference there may be in the application of a razor. We dined with Dr. Butter, whose lady is daughter of my cousin, Sir John Douglas, whose grandson is now a presumptive heir to the noble family of Queensberry. Johnson and he had a good deal of medical conversation. Johnson said he had somewhere or other given an account of Dr. Nichols' Discourse de Anima Medica. He told us that whatever a man's distemper was, Dr. Nichols would not attend him as a physician if his mind was not at ease, for he believed that no medicines would have any influence. He once attended a man in trade, upon whom he found none of the medicines he prescribed had any effect. He asked the man's wife privately whether his affairs were not in a bad way. She said no. He continued his attendance for some time, still without success. At length the man's wife told him she had discovered that her husband's affairs were in a bad way. When Goldsmith was dying, Dr. Turton said to him, "Your pulse is in greater disorder than it should be, from the degree of fever which you have. Is your mind at ease?" Goldsmith answered it was not. After dinner, Mr. Butter went with me to see the silk mill which Mr. John Lumb had as a patient for, had a patent for, rather, having brought away the contrivance from Italy. See Hutton's History of Derby, a book which is deservedly esteemed for its information accurately and good narrative. Indeed, the age in which we live is eminently distinguished by a topographical excellence. I am not very conversant with mechanics, but the simplicity of this machine and its multiplied operation struck me with an agreeable surprise. I had learned from Dr. Johnson during this interview not to think with a dejected indifference of the works of art and the pleasures of life, because life is uncertain and short, but to consider such indifferences as a failure of reason, a morbidness of mind, for happiness should be cultivated as much as we can, and the objects which are instrumental to it should be steadily considered of as importance, with a reference not only to ourselves, but to multitudes in successive ages, though it is proper to value small parts. Sand makes the mountain, moments make the year. From Young's Love and Fame. they do of objects. Moments make the year of objects. One moment's being uneasy or not seems of no consequence, yet this may be thought of the next, and so on, until there is a large portion of misery. In the same way, one must think of happiness, of learning, of friendship. We cannot tell the precise moment when friendship is formed. As in filling a vessel drop by drop, there is at last a drop which makes it run over. So in a series of kindness, there is as late one which makes the heart run over. We must not divide objects of our attention into minute parts and think separately of each part. It is by contemplating a large mass of human existence that a man, while he sets a just value on his own life, does not think of his death as annihilating all that is great and pleasing in the world as it actually contained in his mind, according to Berkeley's Reverie. If his imagination be not sickly and feeble, its wings its distance way far beyond himself, and views the world in unceasing activity of every sort. It must be acknowledged, however, that Pope's plaintive reflection that all things would be as gay as ever on the day of his death is natural and common. We are apt to transfer to all around us our own gloom, without considering that at any given point of time there is, perhaps, as much youth and gaiety in the world as at others. Before I came into this life in which I have had so many pleasant scenes, have not thousands and tens of thousands of deaths and funerals happened, and have not families been in grief for their nearest relations? But have those dismal circumstances at all affected me? Why then should the gloomy scenes which I experience, or which I know, affect others? Let us guard against imagining that there is an end of felicity upon earth when we ourselves grow old or are unhappy. Dr. Johnson told us at tea that when some of Dr. Dodd's pious friends were trying to console him by saying that he was going to leave a wretched world, he had honestly enough not to join in the cant. No, no, said Johnson, it had been a very agreeable world to me. Or maybe I think it's Dodd saying that. It had been an agreeable world to me. Johnson added, I respected Dodd for thus speaking the truth, for to be sure, he had for several years enjoyed a life of great voluptuousness. He told us that Dodd's city friends stood by him so that £1,000 were ready to be given to the gaoler if he would let him escape. He added that he knew a friend of Dodd's who walked around about Newsgate for some time on the evening before the day of his execution with £500 in his pocket, ready to be paid to any of the turnkeys who could get him out. But it was too late, for he was watched with much circumspection. Johnson said Dodd's friends had an image of him made of wax, which was to have been left out in his place, and he believed it was carried into the prison. Johnson disproved that Dr. Dodd's leaving the world, persuaded that the convict's address to his unhappy brethren was of his own writing. But, sir, I said, you contributed to the deception, for when Mr. Seward expressed a doubt to you that it was not Dodd's own, because it had a great deal more force of mind in it than anything known to be his, you answered, why should you think so? Depend upon it, sir, when a man knows he is to be hanged in a fortnight, it consecrates his mind wonderfully. Johnson answered to this. Sir, as Dodd got it from me to pass at his own, while that could do him any good, there was a implied promise that I should not own it. To own it, therefore, would have been telling a lie, with the addition of breach of promise, which was worse than simply telling a lie to make it be believed it was Dodd's. Besides, sir, I did not directly tell a lie. I left the matter uncertain. Perhaps I thought that Seward would not believe unless to be mine for what I said, but I would not put it in his power to say I had owned it. He praised Blair's servants. Yet, said he, willing to let us see he was aware that fashionable fame, however deserved, is not always the most lasting. Perhaps they may not be reprinted after 7 years, at least not after Blair's death. He said, Goldsmith was a plant that flowered late. There appeared nothing remarkable about him when he was young, though when he had got high in fame, one of his friends, says here Burke, began to recollect something of his being distinguished at college. Goldsmith, in the same manner, recollected more of that friend's early years as he grew a greater man. I mentioned that Lord Monboddo told me he awakened every morning at 4, and then for his health got up and walked in his room naked, with the window open, which he called taking an air bath, after which he went to bed again and slept 2 hours more. Maybe I should try that. Johnson, who was always ready to beat down anything that seemed to be exhibited with a disproportionate importance, thus observed, I suppose, sir, there is no more in it than this. He wakes at 4 and cannot sleep till he chills himself, and makes the warmth of the bed a grateful sensation. I talked of the difficulty in rising in the morning. Dr. Johnson told me that the learned Mrs. Carter of that period, when she was eager in study, did not awake as early as she wished, and she therefore had a contrivance that at a certain hour her chamber light should burn a string to which a heavy weight was suspended, which then fell with a strong sudden noise. This roused her from sleep, and then she had no difficulty in getting up. An old-style alarm clock. But I said that was my difficulty, and wished there could be some medicine invented which would make one rise without pain, which I never did, unless after lying in bed a very long time. Perhaps there may be something in the stores of nature which could do this. I have thought of a pulley to raise me gradually, but that would give me pain, as it would counteract my internal inclination. I would have something that can dissipate the vis inertia, the power of inertness, and give elasticity to the muscles. As I imagine that the human body may be put, by the operation of other substances, into any state in which it has ever been, and as I have experienced a state in which rising from bed was not disagreeable, but easy, nay, sometimes agreeable, I suppose that the state may be produced if we knew by what. We can heat the body, we can cool it, we can give it tension or relaxation, and surely it is possible to bring it into a state in which rising from bed will not be a pain. It hasn't happened yet. Johnson observed that a man should take a sufficient quantity of sleep, which Dr. Mead says is between 7 and 9 hours. Still right. I told him that Dr. Cullen said to me that a man should not take more sleep than he can take at once. Johnson said, this rule, sir, cannot hold in all cases, for many people have their sleep broken by sickness, and surely Cullen would not have a man to get up after having slept by but an hour. Such a regimen would soon end in a long sleep. Dr. Taylor remarked, I think very justly, that a man who does not feel an inclination to sleep at an ordinary time, instead of being stronger than other people, must not be well. For a man in health has all the natural inclination to eat, drink, and sleep in a strong degree. Johnson advised me tonight not to refine in the education of my children. Life, said he, will not bear refinement. You must do as other people do. And finally, a footnote here about the long sleep. This regimen was, however, practiced by Bishop Ken, of whom Hawkins, not Sir John Hawkins, another Hawkins, in his life of that venerable prelate, page 4 tells us, quote, and that neither his study might be the aggressor of his hours of instruction, or what he judged his duty prevent his improvements, or both. His close closet addresses to his God, he strictly accustomed himself to but one sleep, which often obliged him to rise at 1 or 2 at the clock in the morning, and sometimes sooner, and grew so habitual that it continued with him almost till his last illness. And so lively and cheerful was his temper that he would be very facetious and entertaining to his friends in the evening, even when it was perceived that with difficulty he kept his eyes open, and then seemed to go to rest with no other purpose than the refreshing and enabling him with more vigor and cheerfulness to sing his morning hymn, as he then used to do to his lute before he put on his clothes. Anyway, a lot of Boswell in that one today. So bye from Boswell. I'll see you later.